Okay, well, this is class 10. Last time we talked about some of the Bible, some of the changes that had occurred over time. So before we get back into the text of the Book of Mormon, and we're in chapter 4 of 1 Nephi, I want to talk a little bit about the Book of Mormon itself, some changes that occurred with it, and some interesting facts that I didn't know until I researched it. So this is a picture of the original manuscript. We've got about 25-ish, 27% of the original manuscript survived. And this is a picture of one of those pieces. They're kind of in pieces. The LDS own most of all of it, except for one sheet is owned by, I think it's the University of Utah has it. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of go back and kind of talk about the original, and kind of so we understand where we got what we have. So in April of 1829, Joseph began translating, from the plates using the translators, and then he finished in June of 1829. And then in October 2nd, 1841, Joseph placed the original copy of the Book of Mormon, the original manuscript. He placed it in the cornerstone of the Nauvoo house. So, of course, the Book of Mormon's done. It's been published. It's had multiple editions come out. And so he's carrying this thing, and he decides he wants to kind of put it someplace safe instead of having to carry it around and risk it being lost. Plus, there was so many copies of it out there. He wasn't really thinking of it in terms of we might need the original, And so he put it in the cornerstone of the Nauvoo house, which was under construction. And they also put some coins, a few other things, kind of like a time capsule, and he stored it there. So the Nauvoo house was never finished. After Joseph's death, it fell into what was finished just kind of fell apart in disrepair, and Emma remarried, and the man that she remarried, his name was Louis C. Bideman, and he was not a member of the church. He was in the military, and he tore the building down. It wasn't done. It was going in disrepair, so he tore it down, and when they opened up the cornerstone or whatever of this building, they found that the manuscript had been damaged. Water had seeped in, and the original sheets a lot of them were just kind of just disintegrated. So they took what they had, as well as the other little things that were in there, and kind of just gave them away. Joseph Smith III ended up with a few of the sheets. Joseph F. Smith had, I think he had like 18 or 20 of the sheets. And they were just individual pages that, because it had all just kind of fallen apart. Well, eventually the LDS kind of have purchased and gathered up all those sheets, and they have all of them now except for one page in the LDS archives. So right now, today, only 28% of the original manuscripts, which this is one of them, exists. So that would be the most original source, which we only have the 28% of it. The next source would be the printer's manuscript. So the printer's manuscript, what happened with it is, so when they wrote it all down, as they're translating off the plates, they got their copy. Well, God told Joseph Smith not to take it to the printer, that copy. So they recopied it, wrote it all again, just off of the original, and took that to the printer. That way the original would remain safe. And so this is a picture of the printer's manuscript. It was just copied right off of the original manuscript. And it is the the oldest known copy of the Book of Mormon that we have, a complete copy. So it was started in 1829, July, so right after they got done with the original, they immediately started on the printer's manuscript. It was done by Oliver Cowdery, and there was 2 other scribes that helped a little bit, but mostly Oliver Cowdery, and it was done in early 1830 in time to take it to the printer. So they found out by comparing what we do have to the original, there was actually quite a few changes made. Most of them were like little, textual things. Maybe they, misspelled a word or, whatever. But there are an average of 3 changes per page, mostly just scribal things. But there were a few things that were also not scribal things. Oliver Cowdery kept this printer's manuscript until his death. He didn't ever let the LDS have it. He kept it till his death. He died in 1850. Then he passed this to David Whitmer, who kept it in his care until he died in 1888. So it was always in the Oliver Cowdery Whitmer hands the entire time. Then in 1903, David Whitmer's grandson sold it to the RLDS. So the RLDS ended up with the printer's manuscript. And it is, even today, of course, is the oldest complete manuscript that we have of the Book of Mormon. And then the COC sold that to the LDS for $35 million in September of 2017. And you all knew about that? Do you remember that, when that happened? Okay. And actually, if you want to see it, the LDS have scanned it in, and you can go onto their website and you can look at all the pages and see it for yourself. So at least they've made it available to everybody. Jeff?
So I never heard about, I knew about the printer's manuscript, but I didn't know that there were changes, mostly scribal, but how sure are we that that's the only changes that were made, scribal errors?
We're not sure. All we can do is compare to what we have of the 28% that's there. They have that on their website too. You can scan it, and I'm going to show you some stuff that I found. But that's really the only way, is to compare the two. Yeah. So that'll take us to so now we're talking about the printed versions of the Book of Mormon that came out in print. So in 1830, once the printer's manuscript was done, it was taken to E.B. Grandin, who was the printer. He printed it. So this is a page of the original. This is one of the original copies. This is the shop where it was printed, in his print shop. They printed 5,000 copies, and this was in Palmyra, New York. John Gilbert, who assisted in this publication, he added in punctuation and decided where the paragraph breaks were. Because the way this thing was written, if you look at the original manuscript, you'll see there's no punctuation, there's no paragraph breaks, it's just word, 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 just right after another. Because Joseph was just dictating off the plates. He didn't even know what he was reading. Emma made a comment. She said that while he was doing it, he said, "Is there walls around Jerusalem?" He didn't even know that Jerusalem had a wall around it. Because the Book of Mormon said it did, and he didn't know that. And so he's just writing giving the words to say, and they're just writing them without any modification at all as far as punctuation or paragraphs or whatever. Well, when they went to go put it into a printed copy, they felt like it'd be easier to read if it had some commas and periods and some structure. So you notice here it's got paragraph breaks, and it's got some punctuation. Yeah, punctuation, but it does not have any verse numbers. So you couldn't say go to 1 Nephi chapter 3 verse whatever. You'd have to say go to page 87 and the sixth line down, and so that up to this point, the first copy of the Book of Mormon, that's all they did was add punctuation and make paragraph breaks. Then in 1837, so they did 5,000 copies initially. Then in 1837, so it's been out for 7 years, they came out with another version. 5,000. So there's some debate as to how many copies. One source I found said 3,000. One said 5. I don't know what it is, so we'll just go with 5. But they made those copies. It was Parley P. Pratt and John Goodson. They had it printed in Kirtland, Ohio. Now they made hundreds of grammatical changes. So they would see things like, I don't know, just things that weren't good English, good modern English, and they would change them to be better English. Now what we found since is that what they were doing was taking away some of the Hebrew nature of the book. Because a lot of those things that we consider grammatical errors are actually proper Hebrew, and it was translated correctly. But good intentions, they're thinking, well, let's make it right, let's make it look better, let's make it easier to read. And so they did what they did. Also, they used the 1830 edition and the printer's manuscript. They did not use the original manuscript. So any changes that were made in the printer's manuscript got carried over into this edition, 1837 edition. So it's actually probably one of the weaker versions of the Book of Mormon in terms of man-injected errors and ideas. But this is a copy of it, again, no versification, just chapter. It's a chapter book with paragraphs. I couldn't, obviously there was no photos of 1837 Kirtland, but this is the oldest picture I could find from 1905 of Kirtland, Ohio. Okay, so then a couple other editions came out. 1840 edition, Ebenezer Robinson and Don Carlos Smith got 2,000 copies made. This was in Nauvoo. And so Joseph was actually involved in this one. He wasn't involved in the 37 copy or version. And this one he did use the original manuscript. So he noticed some changes in how the things they had written that were incorrect on the printer's manuscript. So he got involved and did some of the editing in it. And so they did find many errors. So that was the 1840 edition. And then in 1841, Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, and Parley P. Pratt, they had been doing missionary work in England. Well, British English was different than American English as far as spelling and that sort of thing. And so they wanted to come out, they wanted to edit it to where it would read better for the British. That was more their, the way they wrote. And so this 1841 edition, they called it the European edition. And really they just changed some of the spellings and stuff to match the way the Brits speak. And it was basically just a reprinting of the 1837 edition, which had its own, like we talked about already, it had some stuff that wasn't what original. So those are the editions that happened before Joseph's death. And then after Joseph died, of course, you have the LDS, the RLDS, the various groups, the splits. So I wanted to show you the LDS, what they did, and the reason I wanted to show this is because if you notice, our versing is different than the LDS, and I never really knew why. Well, this is where I'll show you why. So 1852, a man by the name of Franklin Richards produced the first edition of the Book of Mormon with versification. He added in verses to make it more like the Bible, with chapter and verse and easier to reference things. And then in 1879, Orson Pratt did even more, broke it down even further into different chapters and smaller, so it's easier to find a particular phrase. Then in 1920, James Talmage edition, they did more changes in format. They had chapter summaries at the beginning of each chapter, and then they did footnotes, and they just made it more like a modern Bible. And there was some editing of the text as well. And then in 1981, the Quorum of 12 did a version. They took the 1920 edition, and they kind of reworked it. They put the text in double columns, so it looked like the Bible. And they did about 20 or so significant text changes. So you can see how just little by little, we add this and we take away this and we work on this and we fix this grammar and we do that. Pretty soon, you take the original and you compare it to a modern and you've got a lot of change. I mean, there's a lot of change. Think about what happened to the Bible over several thousand years, of these scribes doing things and letting their human thought go, well, this really reads better this way. Or, I think... And continuing, yeah. I mean, think about the Bible versions today that have come out. NIV, I mean, there's probably, 50 of them or whatever. And they all do their little thing, their change. But I wanted to show this for the Book of Mormon, not to take away any validity, but just to help you understand what we're looking at here. And so here's the RLDS history. Now, this is why we diverge with the LDS in terms of versification. It's all the same words for the most part. But the versification changed because of who was handling it. And if you think about it, it's kind of amazing that the Book of Mormon remained in that paragraph format all the way through past Joseph's death. That's how they read the Book of Mormon. Was like a storybook or a long book with paragraphs. No way to give a reference. Hey, look at chapter 7, verse whatever. There wasn't any of that, which probably did help in study because it's just easier to study if you can give a reference. One thing to think about, though, too, is when the Book of Mormon was dictated, there wasn't any commas, there wasn't any paragraph breaks, there wasn't any chapter breaks. It was just straight through. And I have noticed reading, sometimes I'll come to an end of a chapter and I'll think it's over. And then it's like if you continue on and you put those two together, it paints a bigger picture. You see the meaning better. And you realize, oh, wait a minute, they really shouldn't have broken it right there. And that's just human logic. I mean, that's just man getting in there and trying to make what makes sense. But there's actually, and I don't have any examples today, but I have found it a few times where I've been reading and seeing, wait a minute, if you took that period away and kept going, that would be a lot more of a whole meaning, but it just is what it is. But just keep that in mind when you're studying. Don't just stop automatically at the end of the chapter thinking, well, that's the end of the story, because there may be more to it.
I think that's true in some of the writings of Paul, too.
Yeah.
Where it continues into the next chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so here's the RLDS history of the Book of Mormon. So in 1858, James Wright in New York, he basically took the 1840 edition and reprinted it. And then in 1874, in Plano, they added versification. So for the first time, in 1874, we now had verses, chapters and verses. They were not the same chapters and verses that the LDS use. We just did our own version of it. And it's kind of sad that we didn't try to mirror that just because it's hard to minister. You can't go to an LDS guy and say, hey, look at chapter 5, verse whatever, because it's not the same in theirs. So you have to cross-reference everything, which does make it difficult. But anyway, it used the 1840 edition as the basis. None of these were compared to the original stuff. It was just based on what was already printed. Then in 1892, Lamoni, Iowa, they just did another reprinting of the 1874 edition. And that's just as the church grew, they needed more copies, so they would just do a reprint. Now this is where the big change happened. And probably most of your Book of Mormons are 1908 edition Book of Mormons. So in 1903, that's when we purchased the printer's edition of the Book of Mormon, the printer's manuscript. So they went to work immediately with the printer's manuscript and began comparing it to what we had already and found all these things that were not the same. And so they did a lot of research, and that's where they came up with the 1908 edition, was based off of the printer's manuscript, which we exclusively owned as a church. What they didn't know was that there had been a lot of changes in the printer's manuscript off of the original. And so anyway, that's why the 1908 is not, in my opinion, this is my opinion, is not the best version of the Book of Mormon. I think you all already know that I like the RCE edition, and I'll show you why. But anyway, that was done. 1908 edition was first printed in Lamoni, Iowa. It did restore many items that were missing, that they found on the printer's manuscript. They didn't know were there. But it did not alter the 1837 Kirtland edition as far as the grammatical changes. So they went in and fixed the grammar And the 1908 left that alone, didn't change it. Even though the printer's manuscript did not have those grammatical changes, they left it alone because they liked the way it read better. Also, the 1908 further broke down the versification. And then I almost didn't put this up here, but just for history, in 1966, the RLDS put out the what was it called?
Reader's version, they call it.
Reader's version, yeah. And don't even waste your time on that one. It's basically the NIV of the Book of Mormon. They took away all the Hebrew stuff, made it more like a storybook, and
That
just
one truly made meaning differences.
it did, yeah. So if there is remember that I put up the Satanic Bible last time where it said "Thou shalt commit adultery"? That's the Satanic Book of Mormon. So don't read that one. So the 1999 edition of the Book of Mormon is what I use, and I'm not necessarily saying that's the only one we can use, but it's what I use. I like it, and I'll show you why. It breaks. Who all has a RC edition? Pretty much everybody has one. Okay, so it puts it in poetry format. The versification stayed the same as the 1908, so it's easy to cross-reference and all that. But it also they used both the original and the printer's manuscript to do it. They took all that they had from the original, the 28% or whatever the amount we have, compared it to the printer's manuscript. They weren't using the 1837 or the 1840 edition. They were going off of the original, the two oldest things we have, and trying to get the best, cleanest copy of the Book of Mormon that they could. And it's amazing the number of things that they found that really actually change meaning and restore the Hebrew nature of the book. And the purpose of it was to restore a knowledge of the covenants. There's a lot of Hebrew stuff in there that are all related to the covenants. So, like I said, versing was like that in 1908, but set up more like in a poetry sort of format, so it's a little easier to read. They left space out in the columns for notes. They put some cross-references in there just for helpful tools. And then they also put the words of Jesus in red. So when you see red letters, that's Jesus speaking himself. So I think it's a good version. I don't by any means think it's perfect because we still only have 28% of that original manuscript. Yeah.
So from what you described, it seems like the 1840 should have been, why did they not go back to the 1840? Because that one, Joseph actually compared to the original. Seems like that would be maybe the most accurate.
And they may have used that for some, but I do know there's things in there that they added that he didn't change back. There's some handwritten stuff on the printer's manuscript that he left in that edition, and I'll show you that.
Left in this edition?
He in the 1840 edition he left them in, and they really should not have been there. They were added later, but I'll show you what I'm talking about. But I mean, if we didn't have the RCE, I'd say probably the 1840 one is probably the best to use. But okay, so here's just a few modifications that were made, and I wanted to show you. To me, they're meaningful. There's tons of these, but I just pulled up some of the ones that I think have the most impact. So the 1908 says, "And a great and terrible gulf divideth them, yea, even the word of the justice of the eternal God, comma, and the Messiah, who is the Lamb of God." And this is what the original said. "Yea, even the sword," not word, sword of the justice of the eternal God and Jesus Christ, they wrote in Messiah, which is the Lamb of God. I mean, it's pretty hard to mix up Jesus Christ and Messiah. I mean, those are pretty clear. I'm not saying it's not the same person, but those aren't the same word. Someone took an editing liberty there. And for me, the sword, so the sword, the Garden of Eden is guarded by a flaming sword, right? The cherubim and the flaming sword. That's the justice of God. I mean, that's separating us from that Garden of Eden, from the tree of life. That was important because this is part of the tree of life, story of Lehi and Nephi. And so that sword of justice is what is dividing us or protecting keeping us separated from God while we're in a state of sin. And so to say the word of justice doesn't even make sense. It doesn't fit.
And in the RCE with the sword of justice
Mm-hmm.
and the sword protecting the garden, it makes more sense because the sword is justice, Jesus is mercy, Jesus is the way, the sword is the block that keeps the evil one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is not something that's going to make you give up your faith or, leave the church or something like that. But, to me, this is a nice little nugget of truth that we were able to get off of the original manuscript. And I'll show you where it is. This is the actual manuscript, the original manuscript. This is one of the surviving pieces of the original. And it's hard to read, I know, but right there is sword. That's it. See, that's S-W-O-R-D. Now you could say, well, it kind of looks like a word. You can kind of say that. But there is, you can see if you kind of get close to it, there is an S right here. And then the one that's really obvious is right here. That obviously says Jesus. It does not say Messiah. And right here obviously says Christ. So Jesus Christ. It does not say the Messiah. So, and that the RCE took it back to what it actually says in the original manuscript. And I don't know the motivation. I don't know why they would have changed that to say Messiah, but they did. Here's another one. Now, this to me is really a big deal. So, 1908 edition actually added this phrase, the son of. So the original said, and shall make known to all kindreds, tongues, and people that the Lamb of God is the eternal Father and Savior of the world. And that's saying Jesus is the eternal Father. And it says that many, many times throughout the Book of Mormon. Somebody must have read that and said, well, yeah, but wait, no, he's the Son of the eternal Father. We need to add this in. And they did. They added it in. It reads like this in the 1830 edition of the Book of Mormon. The original Book of Mormon reads like this. Every other version since then says Son of the Eternal Father. It was added in on every other version.
That was first injected in the 1837?
Yes. Yeah.
So there's one, like you said, that was retained in the 1840s.
Yes. In the 1837, 40, and 41, and the 1830 is like this side. And so I went back. So this one is not available in the original manuscript, but it is in the printer's manuscript. And I'll show you what they did. See right here, somebody added in "son of" right there, and put a caret to show it's added in. It's different ink pen, it's different text, and the original Book of Mormon doesn't have that. So when it was printed, this was the printer's manuscript that they sent to the printer. And he didn't put that. Well, later, whenever they went through it, they must have said, oh, well, that needs to say son of, and they added it in. And it's actually different handwriting. They've analyzed the handwriting, and it's different handwriting.
Not able to identify whose?
I'd have to look at it again. It may have. I didn't dig in that far. But there are about, I think it's like 6 or 7 times where they added in son of to correct in various places, not just this one. And I think it's just a matter of their understanding. They felt like to say that Jesus was the eternal Father, that doesn't seem right, so they fix it because that was their understanding. But my point is if God said these words as they were, who are we to mess with them? Leave them alone. That's God's words, and then we if it doesn't match our doctrine, then maybe our doctrine's off. Maybe we need to step back and relook at what we believe,
Don't you think that's to support what was recorded about Joseph's vision in the grove where he saw 2?
Yeah, it's likely, yeah. Well, in the Trinity doctrine, that was all very, very Protestant, and they probably, I don't know this, but I could imagine them taking heat for that. If they, in that 1830 edition, I can imagine a Trinitarian saying, "Wait a minute, Jesus is the eternal Father. What?" So. All right. So, as we go, I'm going to show you a few things like these that I've found in the original compared to what we have, just as information. But we'll go ahead and get into the text now. So we're in chapter 4, 1 Nephi, and this is just kind of a quick reminder. So remember, the tree of life is a representation of the love of God. The rod is Jesus, or the Word of God. The mists of darkness represented the temptations of Satan. The river was spiritual filthiness, or hell, death. Pride of the world was the great and spacious building. And then there's that sword of justice that, of course, it would say word in your 1908, but it says sword in the original of justice, that it separates man, evil man, from God's holiness. And that's because of his great justice. And the only way to get across, to get through that justice, we're all doomed. We're all doomed to the great and spacious building. We're all doomed for spiritual death. But to get through that is we have to hold on to the rod of iron. It's Christ. He's the only way to that love of God. So Jesus was the love of God made flesh. He was the Word of God made into flesh. And he is our only source of strength to get through the midst of darkness. And so this vision is all about Jesus. It's all about who he is. Yep.
And if the word of justice or whatever, even though it doesn't make sense, it also changes the meaning. Because if Jesus is the word, he's also mercy, but he's also justice according to the word of justice.
Right. That makes sense.
Probably still need to-
Yeah. Okay, so we'll start. So he's had this experience. He's experienced everything. He's seen all. And you got to remember, he saw all the way to the end of time. He didn't write it all down. He was actually told not to. He was told that John would finish the record. But he saw everything. He saw what happened to his descendants. He saw what happened to his brothers' descendants, the Lamanites. He saw what happened to the world. He saw the pilgrims coming over. He saw this land, this promised land. He saw the Gentiles being scattered. He saw everything. And so now he says, and it came to pass that after I, Nephi, had been carried away in the Spirit and seen all these things, I returned to the tent of my father. Do you remember what we said about the tent of my father? You remember that? So it's kind of a play on words, right? The tent was the symbol for the home, and the father was the ox, and so he returned to the authority of his father. He came back off this mountaintop experience, and now he's back as one of the kids, in subjection to his father. It says, and it came to pass that I beheld my brethren, and they were disputing one with another concerning the things which my father had spoken unto them. Now you can imagine how they must have felt. So here they've given up everything. They've risked their lives. They're out in the desert, 3 days journey away from their home and their wealth, and they just gave it all away, to Laban. And the only thing they got for it was they got some plates and some new wives, and that's all they have. And
This lousy T-shirt.
yeah, I got a lousy T-shirt. That's right. And so now their father tells them that, gives them this experience and says, I tried to get you to partake of the fruit, but you would not because your hearts were hard, and you fell away and you're into the spacious building and you're lost forever. I can imagine they would just be like, what are you talking about, And also, he started talking to him about Gentiles and about promised lands. And remember, they're only 3 days journey outside Jerusalem. So they're not thinking about Gentiles. To bring up a Gentile, that's not even in their, they're not even thinking about Gentiles. They were in the world of Israelites, right? So to even bring that up, it's like, what are you talking about, Dad? And so they're arguing. What does this mean? Why are you saying how horrible we are? Why are you saying that the Gentiles are going to sweep our descendants away and all that? What do you mean? And because they're not going to God in humility. They're not trying to find out what the truth is. They don't like being told they're wrong. And so it says, for he truly spake many great things unto them, which were hard to be understood, save a man should inquire of the Lord. And it would be hard to understand. I mean, think about it. They grew up in the Jewish environment where everything was about the law. Everything was, they're listening to the prophet Jeremiah, the prophet Isaiah. They're in that world. They're in the world of feasts and Jewish, keeping the law and performing sacrifices in the temple. They still had the Ark of the Covenant in the temple at that time. So to be told that now you're going to be swept out and you're going to be basically cut off from Jerusalem, the heart of everything, never to come back. You're going to go over to this foreign land and you're going to get swept off by the Gentiles. And, I'd be thinking, why are we even going? And so it says, and they being hard in their hearts, therefore they did not look unto the Lord as they had ought. And now I, Nephi, was grieved because of the hardness of their hearts, and also because of the things which I had seen. So think about how hard that would be for him. He saw these amazing, beautiful things, and here's these brothers arguing and mad and have these attitudes, and he's like, brothers, your seed's not going to get wiped out. Mine is. I'm sure it was just really hard for him to listen to them after what he had just experienced. And it says, and knew they must unavoidably come to pass because of the great wickedness of the children of men. So he's grieving because of what's going to happen because of sin, because of wickedness. And it came to pass that I was overcome because of my afflictions. For I considered that my afflictions were great above all because of the destruction of my people, for I had beheld their fall. Everything back then especially was all about inheritance and the firstborn and, your future generations and setting up a legacy. And he found out firsthand from God that he would have no descendants that would survive. His descendants were going to be wiped out, killed, and scattered and fall because of dwindling and unbelief and swept off the promised land. That had to be horrible for him. And so he grieved because of it. And it came to pass that after I had received strength, I spake unto my brethren, desiring to know of them the cause of their disputations. So I want to know, why are you guys so upset? He's thinking, I'm the one that should be upset. Why are you guys upset? And it says, and they said, behold, we cannot understand the words which our father hath spoken concerning the natural branches of the olive tree, and also concerning the Gentiles. So they're saying, why is Dad talking about olive trees and Gentiles? What does that have to do with anything? We're the chosen people. We're the house of Israel. We're from Jerusalem. What do we care about Gentiles for? And what's this stuff about olive trees? And you can almost hear them. You can almost hear the conversation. And it says, and they said, behold, we cannot understand the words which our father has spoken. And then I'll skip down to 9. And I said unto them, have ye inquired of the Lord? And I think that is something that right there, that sentence is something that we all ought to really take to heart. Because we all have struggles, we all have tough times, we all have low moments, and we all have confusing things happening in our lives. And Nephi's first response to them when they asked about it wasn't to tell them he knew everything. He already knew it. He'd seen it all. He'd already gotten the interpretation. He could have just started spouting off exactly what they needed to do. But he didn't. He said, have you inquired of the Lord? What's your testimony? Jeff.
It reminds me exactly of something that kind of hit me when I was reading through Romans a while back. In the first chapter it lists all these sins like murder, strife, envy. But one that's kind of thrown in there that we sometimes gloss over is understanding. Some Bibles show it as discernment. But it's odd that understanding would be listed there as a sin. And maybe it's referring to that, like if you don't have understanding, why aren't you going to the Lord asking for that? Just like Nephi says here. Because that lack of understanding leads to a hardened heart. It leads to straying off the path. So it's odd that in all those sins he would list understanding, but I think we're getting an example of it right here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this is a weak point for all of us today, especially in our society. With all of our modern medicine and all of our modern conveniences, and do we turn to the Lord right away when things happen? I don't. I try, but when something happens at my job and I'm upset about it, I don't immediately just go into my office and close the door and say a prayer. I deal with it. I jump right in and I try to handle it, And so then he says, and they said unto me, we have not, for the Lord maketh no such thing known unto us. So they basically just told him, we don't have any faith. God doesn't talk to us.
But see, though, that's the trouble. They're not making any effort, and they're just saying, well, it's up to him if he wants to tell us. Yet, God gave them a father who gave them instruction, and they didn't listen. So why would they listen to God?
Right. Yeah, they have it all available. They have God's available. They just chose not to take him up on his offer.
But the thing I gotta wonder about Nephi here is because he knew all those things would come to pass. How hard it would be to resist the temptation to say, okay, you guys go on your way, because it would have avoided all of that death and destruction and failure. Right. But yet the restraint he showed not to go tell his father, we could avoid a lot of trouble if we leave them behind and tell them to go back.
Right.
If that's what they want to do.
Yeah, I've always questioned, why didn't they just say, well, then go back to Jerusalem? You're a thorn in our side anyway. We'll have a nice peaceful journey and we'll get our promised land and you can go do what you want to do and get killed with the rest of the Babylon. When Babylon takes over, you can go off into captivity. But through studying this, I've realized that so Nephi, he knew God's plan. He saw God's plan. And remember, the Nephites were going to get wiped out. And so the only way for God's plan to be completed was that the Lamanites had to endure. And so I think he had the humility to realize that, I'm going to lose all my future generations are going to be gone, but my brothers, their generations are going to survive, and someday God's going to use them to bring in all the rest of the house of Israel. I think he was seeing the big picture, and he realized that he needed to just be humble and let his brothers do what they were going to do.
Well, the question, yeah.
Go ahead, Carol.
Well, it says, have you inquired of the Lord? All they had to do was ask themselves, but they didn't want to do that. They wanted to put their brother down because he did ask, he got to see.
Right.
I wonder if sometimes we don't ask because we don't want to hear the answer.
That's true. Too.
Yeah, that could be.
And it says, ask me in faith. They may have asked, but they may have not done it in faith.
That's true.
Right.
But we're also seeing the dangers of holding on to your tradition versus going to God, because they didn't really want to talk about Gentiles. They were the same Jews that were better than everyone else. They didn't want to talk about olive trees because we don't want to talk about grafting. Nobody belongs in our family but us. And they don't want to talk about inquiring of the Lord. They had the law. They knew that they were good. They were wealthy. They were the firstborn. They were golden. And if you don't, I don't want to hear anything but, I'm good. And it's really hard to listen to that. Their traditions told them they were good. They were rich. That meant they were righteous. They were the firstborn. That means they were going to get the inheritance. They were the Jews. They're the saved people. They've got walls. They're protected. Those traditions, they just relied so heavily on those.
Yeah.
That, it just shows the dangers of that.
Yeah.
It's like chosen eyes to me.
It does, yeah. Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is like you were saying, Summer, they didn't grow up with Jesus in their thoughts. They didn't grow up with that understanding of the Savior. They grew up thinking the law is what we need. And the law is in Jerusalem, where the ark is. So we're going off here in the desert, in the middle of nowhere, and we're leaving the security of our city that has stood for generations and can't possibly be taken down because we're the chosen people. And it made perfectly illogical. It was perfectly illogical for them to think, we should go with our dad into the desert. It just didn't make any sense to their mind, and they didn't ask God about it because they already knew the answer. So I think it was a case of chosenitis and pride, and that's what made their hearts hard. Okay, and so it says, and so here's Nephi, and you can sense this frustration that he's feeling, but it's more grieving for their souls, for their choices. So it says, behold, I said unto them, how is it that ye do not keep the commandments of the Lord? How is it that ye will perish because of the hardness of your hearts? Do ye not remember the thing which the Lord hath said, if ye will not harden your hearts and ask me in faith, believing that ye shall receive? With diligence in keeping my commandments, surely these things shall be made known unto you. Behold, I say unto you that the house of Israel was compared unto an olive tree by the Spirit of the Lord, which was in our father. And behold, are we not broken off from the house of Israel? And are we not a branch of the house of Israel? So I think it's interesting. Nephi is already feeling and seeing himself as broken off. They're only 3 days' journey outside Jerusalem when all this is happening. But he already knew we're not going back. We are broken off from the house of Israel. And he says, and now the thing which our father meaneth concerning the grafting in of the natural branches through the fullness of the Gentiles is that in the latter days, when our seed shall have dwindled in unbelief. So in the future, when he's talking to his brothers, and he's saying, when our seed, our Lamanite descendants, have dwindled in unbelief, yea, for the space of many years and many generations, after that the Messiah hath manifested himself. So Jesus has already come. It's many generations after that. It says, manifest himself in body unto the children of men. Then shall the fullness of the gospel of the Messiah come unto the Gentiles. And so, in my mind, that's the Book of Mormon, right? The message of the Book of Mormon, the covenants that are found in the Book of Mormon, that message was delivered to the Gentiles, which is us. Now here's the part that has not happened, at least in my estimation. And from the Gentiles unto the remnant of our seed. We have not taken the Book of Mormon to the remnant of their seed like we should have done. I think that's still in a day to come. I know there are people doing some work among the Native Americans, but it's been in small, immeasurable amounts. And there hasn't been any large, harvest of people converting to Christ and understanding who they are. David?
Is that what it looks like when you say that? Because we've had people through history that have taken it, but you're seeing something bigger that would fulfill this.
Yes, because if you continue reading, and we will, it talks about how they will be used to bring in the rest of the house of Israel, and it'll go throughout the whole world. And we haven't seen anything like that, at least in my mind. I think we have a lot more to come. In fact, I think it's right here. And at that day shall the remnant of our seed know that they are the house of Israel, and that they are the covenant people of the Lord. And then shall they know and come to the knowledge of their forefathers, and also to the knowledge of the gospel of their Redeemer, which was ministered unto their fathers by him. Wherefore they shall come to the knowledge of their Redeemer, and the very points of his doctrine, that they may know how to come unto him and be saved. And then at that day will they not rejoice and give praise unto their everlasting God, their rock and their salvation? Yea, at that day will they not receive strength and nourishment from the true vine? Yea, will they not come under the true fold of God? Behold, I say unto you, yea, they shall be numbered again among the house of Israel. So they'll be brought back into the fold of the house of Israel. And I think that means spiritually. I don't think they're all going to move back to Jerusalem. I think it's a spiritual gathering. They shall be grafted in, being a natural branch of the olive tree, into the true olive tree. And I think the true olive tree is actually Christ. You could say it's the house of Israel, but it's more about it's the covenant with God. And so Christ is that true vine. I am the vine, you are the branches. That's what it's talking about. And it says, and this is what our Father meaneth. And he meaneth that it will not come to pass until after that they are scattered by the Gentiles. So the scattering has already happened, right? And he that meaneth that it shall come by way of the Gentiles, that the Lord may show his power unto the Gentiles, for the very cause that he shall be rejected of the Jews, or of the house of Israel. And so he was rejected by the Jews, by the house of Israel when he came. They crucified him, right? And then through the Gentiles, he's going to show his power both unto the Gentiles, but he's also going to use the Gentiles to take that to the house of Israel. So we shouldn't have chosenitis either. We're just being used because the Jews were hard-hearted. Yeah.
I don't mean to grab the steering wheel and pull this off into a ditch, but let me preface this question by saying I know there's a lot of information out there that I just have never gone through. I know Frank Fry has done a lot of work about the DNA of the Native Americans, and there's been rebuttals from other churches and rebuttals to that rebuttal.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think today is the remnant seed? Because there's a lot of talk about, well, there's a bunch of Native Americans in the Northeast and they've been proven to have Hebrew DNA. Well, there's a lot of Native Americans in Central America, in the Southwest, that they don't show that.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think is, in your opinion, who do you think is the remnant?
Well, you did grab the steering wheel on that one. Yeah. Well, it's just my opinion. But when I look at the Book of Mormon, it talks about the promised land. It talks about that it'll be a land of liberty, that it'll never have kings, that if they're righteous, you'll be swept. If you're not righteous, you'll be swept off. Once you're ripened, we read that this morning, if you're ripened in iniquity. I feel like the United States fits that model or whatever. It talks about the pilgrims coming over, the Gentile coming over. The fact that we got the Book of Mormon out of the ground in New York, I feel like it all happened here. Now I know that our church tradition says it all took place in Central America. I think it'd be naive to say that that all the Native Americans stayed in one spot for 1,000 years. I think there's lots of intermarrying and migration, and there's lots of movement. It's interesting, they have found Paleo-Hebrew all throughout the United States, New Mexico. They found a lot of evidence. They did the haplogroup X DNA test. It fits those Northwest tribes. It's like it only shows up in 2 spots in the whole world, Jerusalem and around the Great Lakes, the Native Americans around the Great Lakes. They're the same DNA group. Central America is not. None of those show up in that haplogroup X. And that's been a thing people have said against the Book of Mormon, to say, oh, look, they're not even the same race, So my guess would be that it would be the Native Americans of North America was kind of where it all took place. As to who they are at this point, I mean, I had a personal testimony to go to Honduras and preach. I don't know if that was because God just loves the people there, or I don't think it necessarily means that they're Book of Mormon people. They may be. I don't know. They very well may be all House of Israel. We're told that after Jesus died, or after Jesus came to the Americas, he had other sheep to go visit. We don't know where he went with those either. So with the 10 lost tribes, I wouldn't even want to try to guess, who the people are. But I will guess that the land of America is where the Book of Mormon took place. But,
I totally agree.
yeah. Any other comments, Dave?
So in this scenario here, is this us just not doing what we need to do? Or do we say, well, we're waiting on the Lord for more direction? From what I'm reading is, we need to be talking to these people, whether, let's just say the Native Americans here.
Mm-hmm.
Is it we're just waiting on somebody to tell us to do it, or try to figure the best way to do it? I mean, there's groups that are doing it, but they're really isolated themselves to where, we'll take the money to go do it, but
Right.
it should be bigger than that, I think.
I think it has to be led by God. It has to be His timing and His way. I don't think just pouring a bunch of money into it and going out and living on the reservation is really the answer. I've done some work on the reservations before, just for 3 or 4 weeks, but I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I do think that you should be led there. When I went to Honduras, I had a spiritual dream telling me to go. So I don't think that we should just jump in our cars and head out there. But I don't think the gospel is a door-to-door kind of thing. I think it goes in power. It goes by guidance.
Could it be that we may not see that until after the plates come forward and there's a lot more people who see the truth of it, and then there's just more manpower to go out and do something like that?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, you know, there's scriptures that seem to indicate that the Gentiles are going to fail, and the Native Americans are going to inherit the land again. The Gentiles will be swept off. I mean, there is a caveat, you know, if, and it also does say that there will be Gentiles. The Gentiles that do repent will be adopted in to the house, become the seed of Lehi. So we're like adopted into the family, basically. So I think we're kind of doomed in a way as a group. I think God's going to use probably a select few to get the message to the Native Americans. From there, it's going to blossom once they have it and believe. But I don't know the timing or the people.
I think it also depends on the information you're giving them, because like the Mormons have tried to go onto reservations and they've been utterly rejected.
Mm-hmm.
And is it because they're taking the Mormon church to them, or they're taking the gospel that's in the Mormon to them? I mean, you've got to know your own information before you can take them the right information.
Yeah.
There has to be the right timing.
Yeah, Gentiles have been going on the reservation since the French Jesuits, you know, I mean, way back. And we've taken the Bible, we've taken, you know, and the Mormons have taken the Book of Mormon. I mean, but the message, if you're trying to convert them to a church, that's probably not the way to do it. You convert them to Christ and show them who they are. They're the covenant people of the Lord. And I think that's probably where we've gone awry, is we've tried to add to our numbers rather than just bring them Jesus, you know.
Well, isn't that kind of what your experience was in Honduras, though?
Mm-hmm.
It's not about the church building. It's not about that. It's about just preaching Christ.
Yes. Yep. Showing love.
I mean, that's kind of, I don't know, when I read in the early church of taking the Book of Mormon out to the Native Americans, I never got the sense that, oh, we're going to go make you join our church. It was about, here's the Book of Mormon, here's your history, here's Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And there, that was more the central theme
Yeah.
than what it later became. Or it seems to me that way.
Yeah, the early missionaries, I think it was, who was it that went out there? Was it Parley P. Pratt and a couple others? I can't remember who it was went on the reservation first. They in their diaries, they talked about what they shared, and they were trying to give them the Book of Mormon. They told them they had a history of their people, and it didn't seem like it was focused on getting them baptized into a church. But they got run off the reservation really quickly by the Indian agents at the time, and they couldn't get back on the reservation legally. And so it sort of died away. Everything just sort of shifted to the church structure. Sidney Rigdon joined the church shortly after that, and it just kind of, the Indians just sort of disappeared. So I don't know.
That timing is really important too, because just like Laman and Lemuel didn't want to hear the information. I mean, hearts are hard right now. I mean, we're so polarized right now, and the media is so angry, and you know, you can really see that God is trying to break us all down.
Yeah.
And trying to soften hearts, and I think that timing will come,
Mm-hmm.
but we're definitely going to have to be softened to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to be surprised how it happens, when it happens. You know, we just did a podcast this morning, had a guy on that's he's an ex-Mormon bishop, and you know, high up in the LDS church. He's in his 60s, and you know, has a wonderful testimony of Jesus, but he was completely and utterly entrenched in the LDS. You know, in their doctrine, polygamy, all that stuff. Totally entrenched in it. Totally believed it. You know, Mormon missionary, the whole thing. And the catalyst that woke him up was their prophet or their president told them they had to go get the vaccine. And just by that alone, that was like the wake-up call. He was like, wait a minute, a prophet of God? That guy's not a prophet of God. You can't tell people to do that. You know, and so that was his wake-up. So he began to search out the scriptures and realized it was like a light bulb went off, and everything began to be clear. And so now he's completely rejecting the Mormon doctrines, polygamy, Adam God, all that stuff. You know, and he was a bishop. I mean, he was in I forgot what his position was, but he was high up in stake leadership, you know, and is completely walking away from it. And that was just in October. And he showed up and he came on our podcast this morning. You know, we just had it right before church. But, and we're finding others like him. It's that one little thing that makes it click, and it's a wake up, and I think that will happen. That'll probably happen like that in the Native American circles. Something will happen. Somebody will have an experience. Something's going to happen where there's this wake up call, and all of a sudden you can see who God is, and they begin to search, and grow. And this actually had a modification, so I want to show you this real quick. So the original one says, "Behold, I say unto you, yea, they shall be numbered again among the house of Israel." Well, the 1908 says remembered, that they'll be remembered by the house of Israel.
Very different meaning.
Very different meaning. Numbered means that you're now in the group. You're numbered among them. You're adopted in. You're back. Whereas remember, just oh yeah, those people, I remember them.
I can actually see how that might just be, maybe read incorrectly.
Could have
See
been.
how that could
Right.
easily be-
Yeah, and I'm not saying any of this was nefarious. Some of it,
Yeah, but
but it's
still a big
important.
difference.
Yes, for sure.
difference.
Yes, for sure. Wherefore our Father hath not spoken of our seed alone. Now this is where I was talking about earlier, how it's not just the seed of Lehi or the Native Americans. This is going to go worldwide. It says, our Father hath not spoken of our seed alone, but also of all the house of Israel, pointing to the covenant which should be fulfilled in the latter days. So he's going to use the Native Americans, or the covenant people of this continent. He's going to use them to gather in all of the house of Israel, or all the 10 tribes, all the lost tribes, of all the 12 tribes around the world, which covenant the Lord made to our father Abraham, saying, in thy seed shall all the kindreds of the earth be blessed. So this ties in, this shows you that the Lamanites who have rejected Christ, who have been scattered and trodden upon and lived in poverty, God is going to use them, the poorest, weakest group, to bring about this amazing transformation of the gathering of all the lost tribes of Israel and bring them back to their Savior. God always uses the weak things to confound the wise. And so it says, so that covenant with Abraham is going to be kept by way of the Lamanites. That in thy seed shall all the kindreds of the earth be blessed. And that includes Gentiles, because Jesus, of course, died for everyone, right? And it came to pass that I, Nephi, spake much unto them concerning these things. Yea, I spake unto them concerning the restoration of the Jews in the latter days. This restoration, the restoration is of the covenant of the Jews being brought back to their God, like a hen gathering her chicks under her wings. That's what the restoration is supposed to be. The restoration of the Jews back to the house, back to their Creator. And I did rehearse unto them the words of Isaiah, which spake concerning the restoration of the Jews, or of the house of Israel. And after that they were restored, they should no more be confounded, neither should they be scattered again. So once that gathering, that spiritual gathering happens, that'll be it. They won't be scattered again. And that's a great promise. And it came to pass that I did speak so many words unto my brethren, that they were pacified and did humble themselves before the Lord. So he finally talked them off the ledge, and they humbled themselves. They realized, okay, fine, we're wrong. And it says, and it came to pass that they did speak unto me again, saying, so now he starts breaking down the vision. And since we're at the end of our hour, I'll go ahead and stop. But he continues to explain to them what the vision meant and all that. Anyway, I've still got a lot to share, so we'll just go ahead and end it now.
Can you go back?
Yeah.
So that was, and then go forward? Oh, okay.
Any thoughts or questions, or David?
Going back to when you were starting, is there, or do you know of any group, or is there ever any interest to gather, like the LDS, RLDS, COC, Restoration, basically with the Book of Mormon, and sit down and come up with the best version? Or is it each independent organization is just doing their own thing and there's no interest in it?
Well, I know there's an LDS guy named Royal Skousen that put together version of the Book of Mormon, but it was actually really similar to the RCE. He kind of did the same thing the RCE did. I'm not aware of any joint efforts to do that. I think the biggest hurdle would somebody would have to change their versification. That's probably the biggest thing, because so many things are tied into that, you know.
Each group is going to say, well, ours is the best, so we should
Right.
based off ours.
Right, exactly.
Let's start with ours.
Exactly, yeah.
It's also interesting that one generation from the original had changes.
Yeah.
And copying it verbatim, supposedly from the very translated manuscript, it was already corrupt.
Right.
That's what's not hard to believe, like sad to say, but
Yeah.
Sad to believe.
yes,
Yeah.
I believe.
It is. I mean, it just shows you, it's just natural man. I mean, you've got that original, and you come to it says, you know, like for example, you know, the Lamb is the eternal Father, and then you're in the other one thinking, well, wait a minute, it should be the Son of the eternal Father. You know what I mean? It seems logical. You know, it seems like it makes sense because that's your understanding. But if you do it with pride, you're gonna inject.
What happened when they came to the verse when it says, "For God Himself shall come down"? If they changed that,
Right, and they didn't change that, which, yeah, exactly.
Well, I guess that makes the scripture verse, didn't you ask of the Lord, all the more personal
Right.
and important.
Yeah, I mean, and that's true. I mean, that really highlights the need for us to when we study, we need to do it in prayer, you know, and humility, because, you know, there can be mistakes in all of our scriptures, and so the only way to be sure is the confirmation of the Holy Ghost as we study. But, all right, well, I'm really excited. I have a bunch of stuff I was hoping to get to today, and I didn't get to it, but I'll look forward to it in a couple of weeks, and we'll do it then. So, thank you.